The last ticket had gone out at 9:40, a table of 4 who lingered over their bourbon peaches until almost 10:30. And by the time I flipped the sign on the door to Cello's ED, the whole dining room had gone that particular kind of quiet that only happens in restaurants after hours. The hum of the walk-in, the tick of the stove hood fan winding down, the smell of char and rosemary still hanging in the air like it didn't want to leave either. I liked that hour. I liked it because it was mine, the 10 minutes before he showed up. I was wiping down the pass when I heard the gravel crunch outside, that specific rhythm of boots that didn't belong to any of my line cooks, heavier, slower, unhurried, in a way that only a man who owned his own hours could afford to be. Then the bell over the door, even though the door was locked because he'd let himself in with the spare key I gave him 4 years ago and never bothered asking for back. "You're closing early," Wyatt said, which was a lie, because it was 10:40 and I closed every night at 10:40. And he knew that better than anyone since his cattle trucks rumbled past my kitchen window on their way back from the co-op at roughly the same time every single night for the last 11 years. "You're closing early," I said back, not looking up from the cutting board, "is a thing you say to make yourself feel welcome. You don't need an excuse, Wyatt. You've got a key. I like having a reason." He leaned into the doorway of the kitchen the way he always did, one shoulder against the frame, arms crossed over that flannel he wore even in July, sleeves shoved up to his elbows so I could see the ropes of muscle in his forearms that came from hauling hay bales and fixing fence line and doing every single thing a person could possibly do with their body. Except sit still. Makes it feel less like I'm just here to steal your pie. You are just here to steal my pie. That too. I should say something here about the pie, because the pie mattered in the stupid small way that everything mattered with him. It was a brown butter peach number I'd been testing all week, using the last of his early crop before the real harvest came in, and there was exactly one slice left in the case, and we both knew it, and we both knew he was going to eat it, and we both knew I was going to let him. Because that was the shape of the last 20 years, Wyatt taking what he wanted from my life, without asking, me handing it over like it cost me nothing. It cost me something. It always cost me something. I just never let it show, because that was rule number 1. The rule I made back when I was 14 years old, lying in the grass behind his family's barn, watching him do pull-ups on the loading dock beam with his shirt off, and feeling something in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet and knew somehow, with the terrible clarity kids have about the things that will ruin them, that I could never say out loud. 20 years of telling myself it was habit. That's the joke I told myself. The one I'd worn so smooth from handling, it was practically a superstition. You don't fall in love with your best friend at 14 and stay in love with him at 34. That's not how love works. Love has an expiration date. Love burns down to embers, and then to ash. It's just muscle memory. It's just the shape your hands make when they've held something for so long they've forgotten how to be empty. That's what I told myself the ache was. Muscle memory, a learned behavior. Like flinching, or like the way I still automatically plated 2 desserts every single time I closed, even when I was cooking for one. He came around the pass while I was pretending to be very interested in the reduction I had going on the back burner, a cherry gastrique I was thinking about pairing with the duck for the weekend menu. And he did the thing he always did. The thing that had been happening so long, it barely registered anymore, except that it registered on me like a brand. Every single time he reached past my shoulder, close enough that I could smell the hay and diesel and clean sweat of him under the cold night air he'd brought in with him, and he dipped a spoon straight into my pot. "Wyatt?" "What?" "That's not tasted yet. That's not seasoned. You're going to burn your mouth, and then tell me it's too acidic and I'm going to have to pretend I care what you think." "I always think it's too acidic," he said, already blowing on the spoon, already ignoring me completely. The way he'd been ignoring my professional boundaries since he was 15 and used to steal frosting off cakes I was decorating for the county fair with his bare finger. That's not a flaw in my palate, Theo. That's feedback. End quote. Your palate, I said, swatting his hand as it went in for a second dip, my palm connecting with his knuckles in a smack that echoed off the steel, was trained on gas station taquitos and whatever your mother put ketchup on. You don't get feedback privileges. I have exquisite taste. I'm friends with you, aren't I? That's not taste, that's proximity. You live next door. I could have moved. You'll never move. You've got 400 acres and a herd that thinks you're God. You're not moving anywhere, Wyatt Doss. You're going to die on that ranch, surrounded by cows who love you more than most people do. He grinned at that. The whole easy, unbothered spread of it, the scar through his eyebrow catching the low light over the stove. He'd gotten that scar at 19, a fence wire that snapped back and caught him across the face. And I remembered driving him to the emergency clinic, 40 minutes away, with a dish towel pressed to his forehead and his blood on my steering wheel, my hands shaking so hard I almost missed the turn, terrified in a way that felt disproportionate even then, disproportionate for just a friend. And I never let myself examine that too closely, because some doors you learn not to open twice. Cows are good company, he said. Low maintenance. Don't ask a lot of questions. Sounds ideal for you. You wound me, Theo, truly. In my own community, in my own kitchen. It's my kitchen. In my own second kitchen, which I have generously allowed you to run. That was the other joke, the one that had calcified into a bit sometime around year 6 of the restaurant. The idea that because his family's ranch supplied half of what went on my menu, the beef, the eggs, most of the produce in season, the honey from the hives out past his east pasture, and an investor of tomatoes and temperament, a man with equity in my walk-in cooler. It wasn't true. He never took a dime for the discount he gave me, never let me pay him full market rate, no matter how many times I tried to shove a check into his shirt pocket, and every time I brought it up, he'd just say something like, "You feed half the county on my dime. Theo, let a man have a legacy," and change the subject. Usually by eating something off my counter he hadn't been offered. I turned the heat down under the gas tree and finally looked at him properly, which was always a mistake, because looking at Wyatt properly after 10 o'clock at night, when the adrenaline of service had drained out of me, there was nothing left standing between my nerves and my heart, was like looking directly into a light I'd spent 20 years learning to look near instead of at. He had a way of standing in doorways, like he owned the frame around him. Sandy hair pushed back from being out in the wind all day, that windblown look he never had to try for, pale eyes gone soft and grey in the kitchen light, the kind of tired, happy expression a man gets after a full day of honest physical work. The kind of expression I associated so completely with home that some nights I couldn't tell if I loved him, or if I'd just built my whole life so close to him that I couldn't remember which walls were mine. "You look wrecked," I told him, because it was easier than telling him the truth, which was that he looked like something I wanted to keep. Calved 2 heifers today. One of them didn't want to cooperate. He rolled his shoulder, wincing slightly, and I filed that away the way I filed away every small ache of his, every little piece of information about his body that I had no business keeping inventory of. "You got food for me, or am I just here for the pie?" "You're always just here for the pie." "You've made that abundantly clear in the last 4 minutes. I contain multitudes. You contain a bottomless pit where your stomach should be." But I was already reaching for a plate, already pulling the last piece of duck confit out from where I'd set it aside. For myself, if I was honest, my own dinner, the one meal I let myself actually eat most nights, and I was giving it to him without even a flicker of hesitation, the way I always did. The way I'd been doing since we were 17 and split a single burger between us on the tailgate of his dad's truck because neither of us had enough cash alone. That's the part I never let myself sit with for very long. How easy it was. How there wasn't a single object in that kitchen I wouldn't have handed him if he'd asked. My food, my time, my last hour of the night, 20 years of quiet Tuesdays, exactly like this one. I told myself it was friendship. I told myself the specific gravity I felt every time he leaned in that doorway was just the ordinary pull of loving someone you'd loved so long you couldn't remember the shape of your life without him in it. I told myself a lot of things standing in that kitchen. Most of them lies, all of them necessary, until the night none of them were enough anymore. He ate the duck confit standing up, the way he always did, leaning against the steel prep table with the plate balanced on his forearm like it was nothing, like 20 years of my cooking hadn't taught him where every good angle in this kitchen was. I watched him from the corner of my eye while I broke down the last of the mise en place, sliding containers into the walk-in, wiping down a board that didn't need wiping, giving my hands something to do because if I looked at him too long, I'd start doing math I had no business doing. How many bites? How many minutes? How much longer he'd stay tonight before he drove back to that empty house that used to have Danielle's shoes by the door. She'd been gone 3 weeks. He hadn't said much about it, and I hadn't asked, because that was the arrangement we'd had since we were kids. I didn't push, he didn't explain, and somehow it still counted as knowing each other better than anyone else on earth did. But something about him tonight sat wrong. He'd come in quieter than usual, hadn't ribbed me about the specials board, hadn't done the thing where he steals a taste straight off the line and burns his tongue and pretends it didn't hurt. He'd just folded himself onto the stool by the pass and watched me work with an expression I didn't have a name for. "You're not eating," he said, when I finally clocked that the comfort was gone and he was just holding the empty plate now, turning it slightly in his hands like there was something written on the bottom of it. "I ate at 4. You always say that. It's always true." He set the plate down on the table. Careful. The way he set down everything that mattered to him. Fence posts, newborn calves, the $2 pocket knife his dad gave him the year before he died. Theo, something in the way he said my name made me put the towel down. "What?" He didn't answer right away. Outside, I heard the last delivery truck pull out of the lot, gravel crunching under tires, the sound fading down the county road until the whole building went quiet. In that particular way it did after 11, the hum of the walking compressor, the tick of the hood vents cooling, the sound of a town that had already gone to sleep around us. It was just us and the low buzz of the pass-through light and 20 years of history sitting between two men who didn't know how to say any of it out loud. "I don't know who I am," he said finally, and his voice cracked in a place I'd never heard it crack. Not when his dad died. Not when his first marriage ended. Not ever. Danielle left, and she said I wasn't all there. That I hadn't been all there the whole 2 years, that she felt like she was dating half a person, and she didn't know what was wrong with the other half. And Theo, I didn't have an answer for her, because I don't know either. I don't know what she was seeing. I don't know what she wasn't getting. "Wyatt, no, let me say this while I still got the nerve." He dragged a hand through his hair, that sandy blonde mess falling forward over the pale grey blue of his eyes, and I watched him try to find words for something he'd clearly been circling for weeks, maybe longer, maybe years, if I let myself think about it, which I mostly didn't allow. I've been sitting with something a long time. Longer than her, probably. And I never let myself look right at it, because I didn't. I don't know what it means about me, and I'm 35 years old, and I feel like I'm 17 again, trying to figure out which end of myself is up. My pulse had gone strange in my ears, a low drumming that made it hard to hear anything, except the specific silence stretching out after his sentence. "What are you asking me?" I said, quiet. Because I already knew. Some old animal part of me had known since the second he said her name like that, like a confession rather than a complaint. He looked at me, then. Really looked the way he almost never did, like he was checking my face for the answer before he even asked the question. Like some part of him already knew what it would cost either of us to say it out loud and wanted to brace first. "Kiss me," he said. The words landed in the kitchen like something breaking. Every rational thought I owned, 20 years of careful architecture, every wall I'd built brick by brick specifically to survive nights like this, went up in smoke so fast I didn't even feel the burn until later. "Wyatt." My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. "I need to know." He'd pushed off the stool now, standing, and even with 3 feet of prep counter between us, he felt too close. He'd always felt too close. That was the whole problem. Had been the whole problem since we were 17 sharing a burger on his dad's tailgate. Looked at him in the orange wash of a gas station light and felt something shift permanently. In my chest that I never told anyone about. Not even him. Especially not him. "I need to know if what she said is if there's a reason. If it's Theo, you're the only person I trust enough to ask this. You're the only person I've ever trusted with anything. Just help me figure it out. Please. Please." 20 years and he'd never once said please to me like that. Like it cost him something. Like the asking itself was harder than anything he'd done on that ranch in his whole life. Harder than the year he buried his father. Harder than the divorce. Harder than tonight. I should have said no. I ran the whole argument in under 2 seconds flat, standing there in my own kitchen with a towel still damp in one hand. I should have said no, because saying yes meant handing him the last unguarded piece of myself. The one thing I'd managed to keep in reserve through every girlfriend, every wedding invitation that wasn't mine. Every slow Tuesday where I fed him and let him leave and told myself that was enough, that it had to be enough. That wanting more from him was a debt I'd agreed to pay quietly for the rest of my life. Should have said no, because if this was just him figuring himself out, some experiment born out of heartbreak and confusion, and it turned out to mean nothing to him, wouldn't survive being the answer to somebody else's question and then get set right back down on the shelf like nothing happened. I said yes anyway. I always said yes to him. That was the whole tragedy of my life. Laid out plain, and, even knowing it, standing right inside it, I couldn't do anything different. "Okay," I said, and my voice barely held. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since Danielle packed her car. "Okay," he repeated, like he needed to hear it land twice before he believed it. Neither of us moved for a second. The kitchen felt enormous and impossibly small at once. Every steel surface throwing back the low light, the walk-in door standing half open a few feet away where I'd left it, after putting the confit trays back, cold air spilling out in a thin visible fog across the tile. I don't know which one of us stepped first. Maybe it was both of us, some old gravity finally winning after 20 years of both of us fighting it separately, silently, exhausting ourselves, keeping this exact distance between our bodies. We ended up in the doorway of the walk-in, half in the warm kitchen air and half in the cold, his broad shoulders nearly filling the frame, that thin scar through his eyebrow catching the light, his pale eyes locked on mine like he was afraid if he looked away, the nerve would leave him. I could see my own breath, now faint, mixing with his in the space between us. And the cold made everything sharper, the smell of rosemary and rendered duck fat still on my hands. The ozone hum of the compressor, the warmth of him radiating through his flannel, despite the chill pouring out around us. "Theo," he said, and it wasn't a question this time, just my name, just an anchor, the way it had always been. I lifted my hand, the same hand that had handed him a plate 1,000 nights running, the same hand that had never once let itself want anything for its own sake, and laid it against his jaw, feeling the rough stubble under my palm, feeling him go still, and then unbelievably lean into it. Tilt his face toward mine, like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to touch him like that, and hadn't known it until right now. "You sure?" I whispered. giving him the exit one last time, because some stubborn, self-destructive piece of me needed him to be the one who closed the distance, needed to not be the only one who wanted this enough to move. "No," he admitted, breath ghosting warm against my mouth, cold air curling around both of us from the open cooler door. "But I need to find out." And then he closed the distance himself. His mouth met mine, slow, almost testing, like he expected the ground to give way beneath him and wanted to feel it happen in stages rather than all at once. I felt the shock of it everywhere, 20 years compressed into a single point of contact. Every dinner, every Tuesday, every ache I'd buried under professionalism and duck confit, and the specific gravity of loving someone you weren't allowed to love out loud. His hand came up to grip the front of my shirt, like he needed something solid to hold on to, and I felt him make a small broken sound against my mouth that undid something in me that had been holding steady for 2 decades. The cold air kept spilling out around us, fogging faintly in the narrow space between the walk-in and the world, and for one suspended, terrifying, perfect second, nothing else existed. Not Danielle, not the truck that had pulled away 20 minutes ago. Not the small rational voice in the back of my mind, reminding me this was an experiment and not a beginning. He tilted his head, deepened it, and I felt the whole restaurant, the whole night, the whole last 20 years, tilt sideways with him. I woke up before my alarm, which should have told me something right there, because I never wake up before my alarm. I lay in the grey pre-dawn light, staring at the water stain on my ceiling that I'd been meaning to deal with for 3 years, and told myself, very calmly, the way you'd talk down someone standing on a ledge, that didn't happen. Or, it happened, fine, it happened, but it didn't mean anything. Wyatt was drunk on 2 beers and 20 years of denial and a bad breakup with Danielle. He hadn't even admitted was a breakup yet, and I was the nearest warm body who happened to have known him since we were 19 and stupid and setting things on fire behind the Sonic. That was all. Proximity, nostalgia. A cold room and a bad idea wearing my mouth like a costume. I got up, showered, too hot, and drove to the restaurant with the radio off, which was its own kind of tell, because I always had the radio on, always needed something else in the car with me besides my own thoughts. And this morning, I couldn't stand the idea of a song reaching in and finding the thing I was trying to keep buried under prep lists and produce orders. By 6:30, I was in whites, apron knotted twice around my waist, the way I did when I meant business, and by 7, I had decided, with the finality of a man closing a door and leaning his whole body against it, that we were not discussing it. Not today, not this week. Maybe not ever, if I did this right, if I just moved fast enough and stayed sharp enough that there wasn't room for it to catch up to me. "Chef, we're out of the good butter," said Marcus, my Suze, holding up a nearly empty tub like it was a crime scene. "Then find the mediocre butter and make it behave," I snapped, sharper than the moment deserved, and I watched him blink at me before ducking back toward the walk-in. God, even the word landed wrong in my chest now, a small percussive hit every time someone said it. Asterisk, grab that from the walk-in. We need more cream in the walk-in asterisk. Like the whole kitchen had been rigged overnight, with landmines only, I could see. I put my head down and cooked. That was the plan. Sunday brunch was always a circus anyway. The tourists coming off the highway, wanting biscuits the size of their heads, the regulars wanting their usual booth and their usual eggs, and God help you if you scrambled them a shade too far. The espresso machine that screamed like a dying animal every time someone pulled a shot too fast, and I threw myself into all of it, with a kind of manic, overcorrected focus that made my line cooks trade looks behind my back. I know they traded looks. I wasn't blind, I was just refusing actively with my whole chest to examine why. "Chef, tickets up, table 6 wants the frittata, no onions." They always want no onions. Put it on the ticket in advance. We've been doing this 6 years. Chef, the hollandaise is breaking. Then whisk it off the heat before it breaks all the way. Did nobody teach you anything? And that one came out meaner than I meant it. Meaner than the poor kid, deserting a nervous break in an egg sauce, and I saw him flinch, and I felt the shame of it land somewhere under my sternum. Next to everything else I wasn't looking at, and I didn't apologize, because apologizing would have required slowing down, and slowing down was the one thing I could not afford. I did not look at the window. The kitchen had one window over the prep sink that faced east out past the little gravel lot where the delivery trucks parked, past the tree line toward the low rolling dip of land where Wyatt's fence started, the actual fence, the one he'd restrung 2 summers ago and made me come look at like it was the Sistine Chapel. Asterisk, look at that line, Theo. Dead straight for 400 yards. And I had spent countless slow Tuesday nights glancing out that window without even meaning to, some old animal part of me, checking where he was the way you'd check the weather. This morning I kept my eyes on the pans on the tickets, on the specific, controllable geometry of a plate. I was not going to look toward the fence line. I was a grown man. I had survived worse than a kiss. I had survived my father's funeral and a marriage that wasn't mine, ending in my own dining room, and 11 years of watching Wyatt bring women through my door, like I was a restaurant he took dates to, and not a man who'd have laid down in traffic for him. Could survive this? This was nothing. This was a Tuesday night fluke, wearing the clothes of an emergency, and by Thursday it would deflate back into what it actually was, which was 2 lonely men and a cold room and a bad idea. That's what I told myself, plating a stack of pancakes with more violence than pancakes generally require, while Marcus watched me from the pass with an expression I refused to interpret. And then, at 11:40 in the dead crush of the brunch rush, with ticket printers screaming and the dish pit backed up, and my forearm freshly grazed by the flat top because I wasn't paying attention to my own hands for the first time in 15 years, the back door banged open, and there he was. Wyatt. In his work, clothes, dust on his boots, sleeves pushed up over forearms that had spent the whole night, apparently, not sleeping either, judging by the shadows under his eyes, pale grey-blue, and refusing to quite land on mine. Carrying a wooden crate of tomatoes against one hip like it weighed nothing, because to him it didn't. Heirlooms, still warm-looking, even under the flat kitchen light, deep reds and golds, the good ones, the ones he only brought when he wanted to. Every single person in that kitchen who had witnessed the last 20 minutes of my behavior went very quiet, the way a room does when it senses weather changing. "Hey," Wyatt said, and his voice did the thing it never did. The thing that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. It wobbled, just slightly. Just enough that I heard it, and knew he heard it, too, and that we were both going to pretend we hadn't. "Tomatoes came in early. Thought you'd want first pick before I take the rest to the coop." "Great," I said, and it came out flat and clipped, a word with all the air let out of it, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes, quick there, and gone, like a door shutting. He gestured toward the walk-in with his chin, and I watched the exact second he realized what he gestured toward, watched the muscle jump in his jaw, watched him recalibrate mid-sentence, like a man stepping around a hole in the floor he'd forgotten was there. "I can leave them by the loading door, if that's easier." "That's fine," I said. "Marcus will grab them." Marcus, God bless him, did not move, did not volunteer, just stood there at the pass with a spatula in his hand, like a man watching a car crash. He had no ability to stop, and I wanted to throw something at him. "Cool," Wyatt said. "Cool, yeah." He set the crate down just inside the door with more care than the wood required, and straightened up and looked at me. Actually looked, finally, and I felt it land in my chest like a dropped plate, all that grey-blue steadiness I built 20 years of Tuesdays around. Except now, there was something scraped raw underneath it, that hadn't been there before last night. Something uncertain, something that looked almost like fear. And I hated that I'd put it there, and I hated more that some ugly, cowardly corner of me was glad, because at least it meant I wasn't the only one drowning. "You good?" he asked. "You seem—" He stopped, recalculated. "Busy. You seem busy." "It's brunch, Wyatt," I said, and heard how it landed. Brittle and mean, dressed up as normal. "It's always busy." "Right." He nodded too many times. The way he used to nod at his dad's funeral when people said things to him that he had no idea how to respond to. "Right. Yeah, of course." We stood there, 6 feet apart, in a kitchen full of clattering pans and shouted tickets, and the smell of burnt butter that Marcus was definitely going to catch hell for later, and neither of us said the thing, and the not saying sat between us so loud it drowned out the actual noise of the room. "Tomatoes look good," I finally offered, because I had to say something, because the silence had teeth. "Yeah, the vines did good this year. Enough rain in June." He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I'd watched him make 1,000 times across 1,000 dinners, except it had never once looked this much like a man trying to hold himself together with his own hand. "I should get back." "Cattle won't move themselves." "Sure," I said. "Thanks for these." "Yeah, course." He hesitated at the door, one hand on the frame, and for one unbearable second, I thought he was going to say something real, something that would blow the careful, brittle scaffolding of Asteris. Nothing happened. Asterisk straight off its foundation, and some traitor part of me leaned toward it, wanted it. Wanted him to just say it out loud, so I wouldn't have to keep standing in this kitchen pretending my whole chest wasn't cracked open. But he just said, "See you Tuesday, maybe," in a voice gone small and strange, and let the door swing shut behind him. I stood there for a second too long, staring at the space where he'd been, at the crate of tomatoes glowing faintly red and gold in the doorway light, before Marcus cleared his throat behind me. "Chef, table 9's frittata?" "I heard you the first time," I snapped, and picked up my knife, and did not, under any circumstances, allow myself to think about the specific broken sound Wyatt had made against my mouth 8 hours earlier, or the way his hand had fisted in my shirt like a drowning man grabbing a rope, or the fact that a man who was straight and confused and going through a phase did not look at me, that scraped, raw, terrified, wanting over a crate of tomatoes on a Sunday morning. I told myself it would pass. I told myself that for the rest of the shift, right up until close, chopping and plating and burning my forearm a second time on the same damn flat top, and it didn't pass. Not for one single second, and some small, exhausted, honest part of me had known since the moment his mouth had touched mine. It was 3 days before I saw him again. 3 days of ranch hands I'd known for years. Danny, Cole, the kid whose name I could never remember, dropping off crates at the back door and shrugging when I asked where Wyatt was. "Busy with the herd," Danny said, not quite meeting my eyes, and I told myself that was a normal thing for a rancher to say in the middle of a Tuesday, and I told myself I believed it. Then Thursday at dusk, he was just there, standing at the fence line between his land and the gravel lot behind the restaurant, a crate of squash at his feet, and his truck idling 20 yards off, with its lights cutting gold through the settling dust. I almost didn't recognize the particular way my whole body went still at the sight of him, shoulders set, hat pushed back, that scar through his eyebrow catching the last of the light, like some old animal instinct clocking a threat before the rest of me caught up. "Hey," he said, like it was nothing. Like it was any other Thursday in 20 years of Thursdays. "Hey yourself," I said, and went to grab the crate, and he didn't let go of it right away, so for a second we were both holding the same box of squash in the orange dark, close enough that I could smell hay and diesel and the particular warm-skin smell that was just Wyatt that I'd have known blindfolded in a crowd of 1,000 men. He let go first. I set the crate down on the fence post between us, more to have somewhere to put my hands than because it needed setting anywhere, and neither of us moved to walk away, and the quiet stretched out long enough that a pair of cattle egrets settled into the mesquite behind him, and somewhere far off a screen door banged, and still neither of us said anything. "I haven't stopped thinking about it," Wyatt said finally, to the fence post. Not to me. I didn't ask what. There was only one. There had only ever been one, since Sunday morning, and my heart did something ugly and hopeful in my chest that I immediately tried to strangle, because I'd learned a long time ago what happened when I let it get ahead of itself around this man. Wyatt? No. No, let me. I need to just say this once, and then we can go back to normal, or whatever. He dragged a hand back through his hair, knocked his hat crooked, didn't fix it. In the dying light his eyes had gone that pale storm grey. They turned at dusk, and he was looking at me now, really looking the way he hadn't let himself look in 3 days. It scared the hell out of me. Not because it was wrong. That's the thing, Theo. That's the thing I can't get out of my head. It didn't feel wrong. It felt more right than anything's ever felt with anybody. And I've been married, I've dated half the women in this county, and none of it, not one time, felt like standing in that cooler with you. The crate of squash sat between us like something sacred and stupid, this small orange wall, and my hand had drifted to the top of the fence post without my telling it to, and his had too, and they were close enough now that I could feel the heat coming off his skin without touching it. That particular electric nearness that is almost worse than contact, because your whole body is draining toward the half-inch of empty air. I should have said something careful. 20 years of practice should have kicked in, that old reflex of making a joke, deflecting, filing it away with the postcards and the wedding toast, and every other thing I'd swallowed for the sake of keeping him in my life, in whatever shape he'd let me have him. But the light was doing something to his face, gold going to bruise purple at the edges of the sky, and he'd just told me it felt more right than anything, and some reckless, starving part of me that had been quiet for 2 decades sat up and said out loud before I could stop it, "It scared me too." Still does. His breath caught, I heard it, a small ragged catch in the quiet, and his hand moved another half-inch closer on the post, and for one whole, suspended second, I let myself believe it, let myself hope, stupidly, dangerously, that this was the moment, that he was going to close the last half-inch, and this time neither of us would pull back. That, whatever had cracked open in that cooler, was finally going to be allowed to just be what it was out here in the open. Under a sky the color of a healing bruise, with the cattle lowing somewhere behind him, and the restaurant lights flickering on behind me. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket, and he flinched, like he'd been shocked, and the moment didn't break so much as collapse in on itself all at once. "I should," he said, stepping back, and his hand came off the fence post so fast you'd have thought it had turned to fire. "I gotta get back. Cole needs help with the—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I watched him fold back into himself in real time, watched the shutters come down behind those pale eyes, watched 20 years of practice deflection reassert itself in a man who was so much better at pretending than he wanted anyone to know. "Sure," I said, because I always say sure to him, because saying sure was the whole architecture of my life, and he was already walking, already half a shadow against his idling truck, and I stood there at the fence, with my hand still resting on the wood where his had almost been, and I thought with a kind of exhausted, bitter clarity, here we go again. I did not expect the specific shape it would take. Her name was Renata. She worked at the feed store 2 towns over, drove a red truck newer than his, laughed loud enough to carry across a parking lot, and within a week of that dusk at the fence, Wyatt was seen with her at the diner at the county fair, once. Marcus told me this like he was delivering a weather report, not a verdict, at the drive, in out on Route 9. Her hand tucked into his arm like she'd always belonged there. He stopped coming to the restaurant. Not all at once. That would have been almost bearable. A clean break, a single wound instead of the slow bleed I actually got. First it was Danny dropping off the Tuesday order. Then it was the kid whose name I still couldn't remember twice in a row. Then 3 weeks went by, and I hadn't seen Wyatt's truck in my lot once, hadn't heard his boots on my back step, hadn't had a single one of those slow Tuesday nights where he'd lean against the walk-in and steal bites off my prep station like he had some kind of standing invitation, which, I realized now, with the particular clarity that only comes from losing something. He had, because I'd given him one 20 years ago and never once thought to take it back. I performed indifference beautifully. I want that on the record, at least to myself, because nobody else was going to give me credit for it. I told Marcus that Wyatt was probably just busy with the ranch, told the line cooks that he had a girlfriend now, good for him, said it with a shrug and a smile that I'd practiced 20 years for exactly this kind of moment, this exact specific betrayal my own face was capable of when required. I did not cry in front of anyone. I did not ask Danny a single question about Renata beyond what was strictly polite. I plated frittatas and seared scallops and burned my forearm on the flat top a third time, same damn spot. And I told myself, again, that this would pass, the way I'd told myself every other time in 20 years that this particular ache would pass, and it never had, not once, and some small, exhausted, honest part of me, and hated myself a little for pretending otherwise. The cruelty of it, and I want to be precise about this, because precision was the only thing I had left to hold on to. The specific cruelty of losing a man you were never allowed to have in the first place is that there's no ceremony for it. No one brings you a casserole, no one asks if you're okay. You don't get to say we broke up because you were never together. You don't get to say he left me because you never had him to lose. You just get to stand in your own kitchen at 11 at night, alone, the ranch gone dark across the fence line, and understand that you have been grieving a life that was never officially yours to grieve. That grief doesn't check your paperwork before it comes for you anyway. It was on a Tuesday, of course it was a Tuesday. My whole life had rearranged itself around Tuesdays because of him, 3 weeks and 4 days after the fence, that it finally cracked. I'd sent the last line cook home, locked the front, killed the dining room lights, and gone into the walk-in for no reason at all, except that it was the last place I'd been happy, which is its own kind of masochism I'm not proud of. I stood there, in the cold hum of it, surrounded by crates of things he used to bring me himself, tomatoes and squash and eggs still faintly warm from some coop across the fence, and I put my hand flat against the same shelf he'd braced himself on 8, now closer to a month, hours or days or whatever measure of time, and I let it happen. I let my knees go. I sat down on an overturned crate in the freezing dark, with my back against the shelving, and I put my face in my hands, and I cried. The way I hadn't cried since I was 19 years old, and watched him get into a truck with some girl from the county fair and drive off into a life I already knew I wasn't going to be allowed all the way into. 20 years of walls, built brick by careful brick, smiling at his weddings, cooking for his dates, folding myself down, small enough to fit into whatever shape of friendship he could stand to give me. And none of it, not one single brick of it, had prepared me for how much worse it was to lose the thing after I'd finally been allowed to taste it. You can survive wanting something forever if you never let yourself believe you might get it. What you can't survive, or what I apparently couldn't, was getting 8 hours of it. His mouth, his hands, his voice breaking against my collarbone, and then watching him drive it 2 counties over and hand it to somebody named Renata instead, because it scared him less to be wrong about her